In 1971, NASA sent a group of astronauts into space for the longest mission at the time, Skylab 4. Everything was planned to the second. Wake up at 6 a.m., work for 16 hours, sleep, repeat. NASA controlled every single thing these astronauts did. First, they followed orders, but after weeks of non-stop rigid scheduling, something snapped. One morning, the astronauts refused to answer calls from mission control. They shut off their radios, ignored every command, and took an entire day off. No permission, no explanation. NASA was left completely powerless. Why? Because these astronauts realized something that most people never do in their entire lives. They weren't actually in control. Up until that moment, they had believed they were making choices. But when they stepped back, they saw it. Every decision, every action, every movement was dictated by an outside force. Their so-called free will was an illusion. So, they let go. But what if the same thing is happening to you? Think about it. How much of your day is actually your choice? You wake up at a certain time because society says you should. You eat certain foods because that's what you were taught. You react to things the way you've been programmed to react. Most of the time, you're not making decisions. You're following a script. And when you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. The thoughts you think are yours, they're echoes of something you heard years ago. The goals you chase, most of them were handed to you. The identity you cling to, it's just a collection of habits, influences, and subconscious programming. So what happens when you stop obeying the script? You start seeing reality for what it is, and you realize nothing in your reality was ever real to begin with. Let's break something down real quick. Have you ever noticed how babies don't know what a mirror is? You put a 6-month-old in front of one, and they just stare. No recognition. No, oh wow, that's me. It takes about 18 months before they even realize they're looking at their own reflection. Why? Because self-awareness isn't something you're born with. It's installed. At some point, you were just like that baby. You had no identity, no concept of you. Then, little by little, people told you who you were. This is what you're good at. This is what you should believe. And you absorbed it all, like a sponge soaking up water, not questioning if it was ever actually yours. But here's where it gets weird. If your entire identity was built from external influences, then who are you beneath all of that? Because let's be real, most of what you think is you is just programming. Ever hear a song you haven't listened to in years and suddenly you remember all the lyrics? You didn't consciously store that information. It just sat there, waiting for the right trigger. Well, the same thing happens with your personality, your fears, your preferences. A random comment from a teacher when you were 7, still in your brain. That embarrassing moment from high school, still shaping how you act. Your belief about success, relationships, happiness, probably something you picked up from your parents, society, or a TV show you forgot you watched. Most of the time, you're not making choices. You're running pre-installed scripts. And here's how you know this is true. Try to change. Try waking up tomorrow and being a completely different person. A person who doesn't care what people think. A person who isn't afraid to take risks. A person who feels completely free. Sounds impossible, right? That's because your mind is addicted to the version of reality it already knows. It doesn't want to let go of the identity it's built. It clings to old patterns, even when those patterns make you miserable. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And suddenly, you start questioning everything. Who would you be if no one told you who you are? What would you believe if you erased everything you were taught? And if nothing in your reality is real, then what's stopping you from creating a new one? Alright, let's break something strange down. Have you ever met someone who's absolutely convinced that their way of seeing the world is the only way? Like no matter what you say, no matter what proof you show them, they won't budge? It could be about anything: life, relationships, success, even if pineapples belong on pizza. For the record, reality itself might be an illusion, but pineapple on pizza? That's an unsolvable debate. But here's where it gets interesting. They're not being stubborn on purpose. Their brain literally won't let them see past their version of reality. And whether you realize it or not, your brain does the exact same thing. There's something called cognitive dissonance. Basically, when your mind is faced with a truth that completely contradicts what you already believe, it does something sneaky. It bends reality to make sure you don't have to change. Here's how you've seen it in action. Ever argued with someone who flat out ignores facts? That's their brain protecting them from uncomfortable truths. Ever found yourself justifying a bad decision instead of admitting you were wrong? That's your mind scrambling to avoid admitting the truth. Ever been so convinced something happened a certain way, only to find out later you completely misremembered it? That's your brain altering the past to match your present beliefs. You see the problem, right? Your mind isn't built to find the truth. It's built to keep you comfortable. And this is why most people never change. Not because they can't, but because their mind actively fights against anything that challenges what they already believe. This is how entire realities get built and reinforced without anyone realizing it. Think about every decision you've ever made. Now ask yourself, was it really your decision? Your parents, your culture, your environment, they all programmed your mind before you ever had the chance to choose for yourself. And that's not the crazy part. The crazy part is how much you're still following that programming without realizing it. You know how, when you're in a dark room, you reach for the light switch without even thinking? Or how, when you pick up your phone, your fingers already know where to go? Your brain is doing the exact same thing with your entire life. Your reactions and your fears, your goals, your idea of what's possible. Most of it isn't even yours. It's just been repeated so many times. Your mind accepted it as reality. But here's the thing. Reality isn't something you follow. It's something you create. And the second you stop blindly trusting the script, something wild happens. You realize you can rewrite it. Letting go isn't about giving up. Letting go isn't about losing anything. Letting go is about seeing how much you never needed to hold on to in the first place. All right, let's push this even further. There's something weird about how people defend their reality, even when it's working against them. You've probably seen this happen. Someone is in a bad situation, stuck in the same patterns, miserable about it. But the moment you suggest something different, something better, they immediately reject it. They say things like, "That's just how life is. I could never do that." It's not that simple. And just like that, they shut the door on an entirely different way of living. But here's the question. Are they rejecting the idea because it's truly impossible, or because their mind refuses to let them see another way? See, the brain has one job, to keep you alive. And survival, to the brain, doesn't mean happiness or success. It means predictability. If you've been struggling your whole life, if you've been running the same patterns, your brain sees that as safe. And because of that, it will actively resist anything that threatens to change your reality, even if that reality sucks. That's why people stay in toxic relationships. That's why people stick to jobs they hate. That's why people stay in mental loops that make them miserable. It's not that they can't leave. It's that their brain won't let them see a world where they already have. Ever heard of learned helplessness? Scientists did an experiment where they put a group of dogs in a cage with a small barrier. On one side, the floor gave a harmless shock, and on the other side, it didn't. At first, the dogs jumped over the barrier to escape the shock, but then the scientists raised the barrier so they couldn't escape at all. After a while, something disturbing happened. When the scientists lowered the barrier again, the dogs didn't try to escape anymore. Even though they could now, they just lay there, accepting the shock. They had learned that there was no point in trying, so even when freedom was right in front of them, they couldn't see it anymore. Now, here's the part no one likes to hear. Most people are doing the exact same thing. Not physically, but mentally. They've spent so long believing that things can't change, that they don't even try when the opportunity presents itself. They see a new idea, a new way of thinking, a new path, and they ignore it because their mind has convinced them there's no point. And this is exactly why letting go is the key to everything. Letting go doesn't mean losing. Letting go doesn't mean quitting. Letting go means freeing yourself from the mental barriers that were never real to begin with. Because reality isn't something that's given to you, it's something that's negotiated. And the moment you stop arguing for your limitations, the moment you stop clinging to beliefs that were handed to you, the moment you stop telling yourself that life has to be a certain way, that's the moment you actually start living. You ever notice how some people break free from their past, reinvent themselves, and live completely different lives, while others stay trapped in the same patterns forever? It's not intelligence. It's not luck. It's what they're willing to let go of. Because here's the truth. Everything you hold on to shapes your reality. If you hold on to fear, you see danger everywhere. If you hold on to anger, you find enemies in every direction. If you hold on to an identity that no longer serves you, you'll sabotage yourself the second you try to grow. Your mind is like a house, and over the years, it's been filled with furniture. Some of it is useful. Some of it is junk that was dumped there long before you had a say in it. And most people? They never clear out the junk. They just live around it, rearrange it, make space for it, until their entire life is designed around something they didn't even choose. But then, there are the people who wake up one day and decide they don't have to live in a cluttered house anymore. They start throwing things out, old fears, old beliefs, old limitations, and that's when things shift. Because once you stop carrying what no longer belongs to you, you finally have room to grow. Letting go isn't about losing. Letting go is about making space for something better. And when you do that, reality stops feeling like a prison and starts feeling like something you can actually shape. Most people don't even realize how much they're holding on to. Not just old beliefs, but invisible attachments, ideas that were never truly theirs, routines they never questioned, limitations they simply accepted. Think about the rules you follow every day without even realizing it. Not laws, not ethics, but rules about who you are, what's possible for you, what you deserve. Who put those rules there? Because someone did. Maybe it was society, maybe your parents, maybe your past experiences. But at some point, you started playing by rules you never agreed to. You can't do this because you're too old. You're supposed to have life figured out by now. People like you don't succeed in things like that. This is just how it is. These rules aren't real, but they feel real. And that's what makes them dangerous. Because if you never question them, if you never step back and see them for what they are, they become invisible walls, shaping your entire reality without you even knowing it. It's like a dog that's been trained with an electric fence. At first, the shock stops them, but over time, they stop trying. The fence doesn't even need to be turned on anymore, because in their mind, the boundary is real. People are the same way. They hit a limit once, and then they stop pushing. They tell themselves, I guess this is just as far as I go. They stop trying to break through because they believe the wall is still there. But here's the thing. Most of the walls in your life aren't even real anymore. You just stopped testing them. And the moment you do, the moment you lean forward, just a little, you realize there was never anything stopping you except the belief that you couldn't. And once that belief collapses, there's no limit to how far you can go. So what happens when you stop following those invisible rules? At first, it feels uncomfortable, almost unnatural, like stepping into a world where nothing makes sense anymore. Because for your entire life, you've been operating under a system that told you what was possible and what wasn't. And suddenly, you realize that system was never real. But here's the part that no one talks about. When you start questioning reality, really questioning it, you don't just break free from limitations. You start seeing how everything is shaped by perception. And that's where things get interesting. Because once you see through the illusion, you realize reality isn't something you live in. It's something you participate in. Think about it. A person who believes they're unlucky will always see evidence that proves them right. A person who believes people are out to get them will always find reasons to justify their paranoia. A person who thinks they're unworthy will subconsciously reject anything good that comes their way. It's not that the world is designed against them. It's that they're looking through a lens that makes it impossible to see anything else. And once you take off that lens, everything changes. Suddenly, what felt impossible before becomes obvious. The rules you used to follow, they don't apply anymore. The identity you thought you had to stick to, turns out, it was never set in stone. And this is where most people freak out. Because if your old reality was just a construct, what do you do with that information? Some people try to go back to the way things were. They pretend they never saw behind the curtain. It's easier that way, more comfortable. But for the ones who embrace it, the ones who lean into the unknown, they become architects of their own reality. Instead of waiting for the world to change, they shape their world. Instead of accepting limits, they test them. Instead of asking, what's possible? They decide, what's possible? And that's how reality stops being something you're trapped inside and starts becoming something you create.